we'll try to make this quick. I know that y'all are busy and have tons of stuff to do and probably some things to do tonight as well. I appreciate you coming to this lobbyist training. We schedule this 4 times a year. We got a number of people who are attending online as well, and so we're certainly glad to have you here too. For those of you who are online, if you have questions that pop up during the course of this presentation, please text them to this number that is on the screen behind me, and we will answer them just as soon as we can.
That's not right. Sorry, I didn't change it. Text them to 30334.
All right, do you have your mic on?
Oh, yeah. Let me turn it. Text it to the number that's on the email that I sent you. It's 334-303-1726. 334-303-1726. And that's Cynthia's cell.
Okay, and for those of you who are sitting here, you can ask questions whenever you want to. That number is for those who are attending by webinar. And generally what we do is wait until the end of the presentation and answer those questions at that time, because through the course of the presentation, we hope that some of this material may be covered. Just some ground rules to establish at the very beginning. What we tell you here is the floor, it's not the ceiling. So this is the bare minimum standards for compliance with the Ethics Act. You are certainly allowed and in fact encouraged to go above and beyond what the bare minimum requirements are. Nothing that we say here today constitutes a formal opinion from our office. This is purely just a training session, very general overview of the Ethics Act. If you have specific questions that relate to you and your conduct, there is a method for getting that question answered, and we will be happy to go over that with you later on in the presentation. Now, our commission is made up of 5 individuals who are appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the House to serve staggered 5-year terms. Does anybody here in the room lobby anywhere else, any other states or the federal level or any other body you do? Do you lobby federally or? Okay. Well, what you'll hear today, you will find some echo of in the federal regulations regarding lobbying too, and stuff that comes out of the Office of Governmental Ethics and the administrative rules that they have. Our act was patterned to large extent after that body of law too, so there's some familiarity here. If you had practiced in other states, what I wanted to say is that our method for getting commissioners and how they're appointed and how they serve is pretty standard. What we have here is what they have in nearly every other state. One difference between our commission and some other states is that our commissioners are not partisan positions. For example, in Florida, you'll have a Republican on there, you'll have a Democrat on there, and they're there because of their party affiliation. Here, our commissioners are nonpartisan. By statute, they have to be nonpartisan. They cannot participate in partisan politics. And our chair is John Plunk. He's a lawyer from Athens. He is at the end of his 5-year tenure. We have, let me go back. Justice Lynn Stewart, former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. She is, I believe, in her 2nd year or maybe even her 3rd year with the commission. We have Stan McDonald, who's in his 4th year on the commission. He's a lawyer from Huntsville. We have General Ed Kroll, who is from here in Montgomery. He's the only non-lawyer on the commission, but this is his 2nd time to serve on the commission. His experience in the past, he's a retired brigadier general from the Air Force, but he also worked for Miltope, which was a government contractor for a number of years after he retired from the military. The value to you in that is that he's well familiar with the activities of companies that interact with government and the processes for that, but he understands it from the position of those who are seeking to do business or perhaps even influence government. And we have Debbie Long, who is our newest commissioner. She's a former general counsel from Protective Life in Birmingham. Again, the perspective of what we call a principal under the Act, or those companies or businesses that retain lobbyists. So as you can tell, there's a wide distribution of backgrounds. We are lawyer heavy. You don't have to be. The code doesn't require it. But over the last 7 years, for sure, the appointing authorities have wanted lawyers on the commission, and we love to have them. It's certainly raised the level of analysis that goes into all of the decisions. These folks have spent careers analyzing witnesses, statutes, you name it. If we do it, they've done it. So there should be a good bit of comfort, I think, in knowing who is serving on the commission and what their roles are. But now their statutory function is they make all the official decisions of the commission, and I work for them, and my staff works for me. But they're at the top, so everything official comes through them. The legal office with the commission and I have the ability to answer questions for you. We can do it through informal opinions or formal opinions, and those are two very different methods of getting answers to your questions. An informal opinion is exactly what it sounds like. It is an informal legal determination made by the staff. It does not give you protection from prosecution. Now, that being said, the type of information we give in informal opinions are answers that are readily discernible from the clear language of the code, or we've already answered in a formal advisory opinion. We will get questions from lobbyists from time to time. Do I need to register as lobbying for this group, or what is the time restriction for me to change my lobbying registration? Well, that's 10 days, and we can pull that directly from the language of the code. But because we are giving you a legal opinion from that, it's got to be in the form of an informal opinion. We have questions that have come up from outside folks before where they've wanted to know whether what they were doing was lobbying, and lobbying is a defined term in the Act. So if you're seeking the approval or the defeat of legislation or regulations, you're going to be lobbying. If you are seeking contracts with executive branch agencies or the executive branch of the state, then there's a separate provision that says that also is within the definition of lobbying. But those are answers that we can readily pull from the Code of Alabama, so that answer would come in the form of an informal opinion. The process for receiving one of those is to email us and ask us the question, write us and ask us the question. You can call us and ask us the question too, but we can't give you the answer over the phone. We've got to give you the answer in writing. But our turnaround has been pretty quick with that, and certainly with most of the questions we get from lobbyists, it has to do with what's got to be disclosed, how much has got to be disclosed, what the technical requirements of compliance for disclosure are, and we can get that answered often within the same day, certainly very quickly with that. Okay, so that's an informal opinion. A formal opinion is a formal public document that the staff prepares and the commissioners actually vote on. And if the commission votes on them, then they become a public document that anyone can access. And generally what we are doing there is answering a question that has not been answered before. Cynthia will talk about in a little bit a formal opinion that we gave to the Business Council of Alabama a few years ago where they wanted to know about if certain expenses could be aggregated. And I think most of you know that if you spend over a certain amount of money, $250 in a 24-hour period, you have to report that to the commission in your quarterly report. But BCA had a question of what if you've got a number of people who are sharing in that expense? Can you aggregate that expense even if it puts you below the $250? And so we answered that question, and the short answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. Depends on what the expense is for. But as a general rule, there are broad allowances, we think, under the code for aggregation within the appropriate circumstances. But because that had never been answered before, because it's not specifically provided for or clearly delineated within the code, we recommended that they get a formal advisory opinion. The value of that is that it puts everybody in the community on notice of the answer. So all lobbyists, at least had the ability to know about it, as did the companies that employ them. The added benefit of a formal advisory opinion, it is the only way that you can get protection from prosecution. So if we give you a formal advisory opinion, the facts you gave us were accurate, you didn't misrepresent anything, and you rely on that document, but stay within the four corners of it, then you get that protection from prosecution as well. So those are the two methods of giving answers to questions that may arise under the Act. Having gone over that, do any of you have any questions about that process? Has anybody here ever received one of those from us? An informal opinion or a formal? An informal, I assume? Okay. That process go okay for you? Okay, good. You need to say that a little louder.
It did, yes.
Okay, good. Well, if that ever changes, let us know. But just so you know, the system that we've got is the email comes in, it comes into me. I briefly review it, and then I dispatch it to our Assistant General Counsel, Brian Patterson, who's sitting here on the front row. And then Brian in our office talk about the answer, and ultimately I would approve it, and then it goes out. We tell folks 14 days because we can get backlogged at times, but we generally are answering well within 14 days. What I'd pass on to you, though, is that if you have a question to which you need an answer quickly, or for which you need an answer quickly, let us know your time constraint, and we will do everything that we can to get it to you quickly. We know that things come up and they get dropped in your lap at the last minute. We're more than happy to help you out as much as we possibly can. So all you got to do is alert us to that. Okay. Oh, one thing that I did want to mention. We can only give prospective advice. Most everybody does a really good job of, even if they haven't been told that, knowing that, they ask ahead of time. You can't ask us to give an opinion about conduct you've already engaged in. So if you were to ask a question, hey, I gave this huge gift to a public official, was that okay? That's really not the kind of question that we can answer. We would prefer that you ask that question in the reverse. Hey, I anticipate giving this huge gift to a public official. Is that okay? Because that would give us the opportunity to say, well, hang on a minute. What do you mean by gift? What is it? Under what circumstances is it being given? And there are any number of occasions in which things can be given to public officials, and it's not a violation of the law. So it behooves you to ask ahead of time. I think it helps the process out. So again, that would be an informal opinion, and we ask that you ask that just as soon as you possibly can when you have a question that may arise. We've had, by way of example, we've had lobbyists before ask questions. There is a manufacturing entity that has just located within the state. There's going to be a big reception at which the governor and the lieutenant governor and all members of the legislature will be there, and this company wants to give an expensive whatever from their country to the governor. Is that okay? And we've been asked that question in various ways. And because this person asked ahead of time, we were able to look at what it was. In one instance, it was something that had, I guess, a retail value as they were buying it that was certainly over $25. But it was embossed with a whole bunch of stuff for this company. It really had no real fair market value. You're not going to really be able to sell that kind of item and get a whole lot for it. And there is an allowance for promotional items. And under the circumstances in which that was being given, we were able to say this is really a promotional item, and that's all right. We've had auto manufacturers who wanted to present something from their country that was really expensive and wanted to give it to the governor. And we had said before that as long as that is being given to the state and it's in official use only, for example, if it's at the mansion or if it's at the office, then that is still considered a public gift. Where it would change is if the governor were to take it home and convert it to personal use. So those are two examples of things that on the surface to some people might appear to be prohibited by the act, and under the right facts they would be prohibited, but under the facts in which they were being given, the intent was clear, and it was also readily discernible that this fit within an exception to the gift ban prohibition. So be sure to ask those questions ahead of time. Okay, I want to talk briefly about the complaint process. You should understand that violations of the ethics laws in Alabama are criminal in nature. An intentional violation is a Class B felony. Other violations are Class A misdemeanors, and we also have the ability to fine up to $6,000 per violation. Now, in some states, it's a civil remedy only. Some states have weird things where a public official can be have things taken away from them, including their position for violations. We don't have any authority like that, but we do have the authority to issue fines. But we work in conjunction with the Attorney General's office and the DAs throughout the state in the enforcement arm of our duties. So what we do is receive complaints that are filed against those who are operating under our act or under the jurisdiction of the commission. And our commission reviews them to determine whether there is sufficient evidence of a violation. If they review the evidence, and remember what the makeup of these individuals is, and if they review it and determine that it is more likely than not that there's a violation, then we would refer that case to the Attorney General or to the local district attorney for further investigation, okay? So that's how that works out. If we issue a fine, it's still got to be approved by either the DA or the AG. So on the criminal end of it, ultimately, it's those two groups that have the ultimate say-so in what happens criminally with anything that happens here. So the things that y'all would need to be, I guess, mindful of as you interact with government, the primary provisions that you're going to have apply to you are the gift ban under one section of our act that prohibits the giving of a thing of value from a lobbyist to a public official or a member of their family, or to a public employee or a member of their family, okay? And I'll go over that definition in a bit, but that's one of the prohibitions that you would need to be aware of, and the primary one. You can also not offer anything, whether it's a thing of value or not, for the purpose of corruptly influencing anybody's official action. Now, most of what you're going to be offering would be classified as a thing of value anyway, but they're slightly different. The first prohibition I talked about is simply a prohibition on the transfer of the thing that has value over to the public official or public employee. The second really goes to what people's motives are, and whether you are attempting to corruptly influence their decision or to get them to do something that they would not normally do in the ordinary course of their public duties. The clearest example of that would be bribery, where you're offering that in order to get them to, to vote a certain way. Another example of that could be, though, let's say that somebody promised a job to the child of a public official for the purpose of getting them to vote a certain way. And that for the purpose, that little prepositional phrase there, of for the purpose of getting them to act in a corrupt way matters, because that's really the intent that is required there. Now, under the general prohibition about giving something of a thing of value that I first talked about, a job could be that too. But the difference is that the code is drafted in a way that, absent that corrupt motive that I talked about, what you would have to establish is that the job was being offered to a family member for reasons that had nothing to do with the official position of the public official. That might seem like a pretty subtle distinction, but it's really not. Basically, the general prohibition just requires proof that the public position had nothing to do with the person getting the job. The corrupt influence, as the specific reason why you're doing it, must be to get them to act in a corrupt fashion. Okay? Is that any way clear? I mean, I hope so. If you are not sure where your conduct falls, that's a great question to ask in an informal opinion. It's also great if you're not sure where your conduct falls, is let's just stay away from it. I mean, if it's that close a call that you're not sure whether it's a corrupt influence or not, then maybe it shouldn't be done. But when I say all of this, I do want to point out that most of what you're going to do in the course of your daily lives interacting with the legislature finds approval within the act somehow. Okay, I mean, unless you're operating outside the bounds of it, but things like receptions and dinners where you've got, you're taking maybe two committees, one from the House, one from the Senate, out to dinner, and y'all are talking about legislation that is important to you or to your clients. All that kind of thing is allowed. Conferences where public officials or public employees may come and speak, and having the rooms comped and all that kind of stuff is certainly allowed within the act too. There's separate allowances just for meals alone. They're not very high, but they're there. The allowance for you as a lobbyist for a meal is $25 per occasion, or $150 annually. Your principal has $52.50 annually, and you can't stack that together. But that may be small consolation, but I do point it out to you that it is there. So for the low level stuff, not the very expensive stuff, just know that there's a separate exception there too. And there's I believe there's 18 exceptions to the definition of thing of value, and it covers most of what is allowed in the normal course of business and common dealings between people, exchange of gifts between friends, family members. All of that is allowed as well. So the prohibitions are there, and they should be monitored, and you should be mindful of them. However, there is a lot of fairness baked into our act, and that's why if you have a question about whether something can be given or should, you should ask us. Oh, y'all might want to remember this. Y'all can't be solicited for anything except a campaign contribution. That is probably the clearest provision we've got in our act. Y'all can't be asked for any favor at all or anything, whether it's a thing of value or not, except for a campaign contribution. Just know that that's there, and that is is a strict prohibition. And if you have questions about that as they come up, please ask us. Remember, de minimis. Anything under $25 is presumed to be okay. So that covers a lot of items that might be associated with a larger event, or it can facilitate transactions that are of such a low level that no one should really be all that concerned about it. The example that I like to give, because this is brought up all the time, public officials or public employees and lobbyists will sometimes say, well, look, I mean, we're so worried about all this because let's say I go to Chick-fil-A and I'm standing in line with somebody and I pick up their lunch. I don't want to go to prison for that. Well, there's a meal allowance that mirrors this and says $25 per occasion for y'all, and I am betting that you're spending less than $25 in the setting I just described. And also, let's say it's a bottle of water, or it's some, I don't know, you give them a thumb drive or some other very small token of, let's say it's a thumb drive with your association name on it or something. I mean, chances are that's going to be less than $25 anyway. So the value of that for you is not for you to jump up and down and be excited that you've got $25 you can spend. It's so that hopefully you won't worry about whether that $15 item is something that you'll get in trouble for. So just remember that on those kind of small items like that, you may just want to have as a part of whatever your method of interacting with the legislature or whoever it may be, that is covered. So that's one less thing for you to have to worry about. Okay? Any questions about any of these exceptions that I've talked about so far? So any gift, benefit, favor, service, gratuity, that's the definition of thing of value, and that is what you are prohibited from giving to a public official or a public employee. But just remember, it's a broad definition. But pretty much everything that would qualify as a thing of value is going to be able to have a dollar figure attached to it somehow. If it's a job for a family member, that clearly that's got some value. If it's a favor, because you'll notice that word that's in there, that you're doing for somebody, it still, more often than not, is going to have to have some monetary value discernible from it, some quantitative value to it. Again, from what I've seen, most of the things that would be transferred are going to clearly have value. Tickets are a big thing. Okay, tickets are a real big thing. It was such a big thing when the act was drafted that they actually put them in there in the definition. So just remember that all of that is included within the definition of thing of value. It is a broad definition. If you've got a question about whether something qualifies as a thing of value, then that's something to ask in an informal opinion. Okay. Now, I'm going to turn the program over to Cynthia Ralston, and she's going to stray a bit from the PowerPoint. Vicki Manning was with our office forever, and a lot of people dealt with Vicki over a long period of time. Y'all may not have dealt with her, but Vicki retired. And then we had someone lined up to take her place, and that person took an offer somewhere else. So Cynthia graciously agreed to take over all of those duties at a very difficult time, because we found out in early December that Vicky's replacement had accepted a job somewhere else. And we knew that y'all had registrations coming up in January. So Cynthia stopped what she was doing and has taken this on and has done a beautiful job with it. Certainly for the time being, if you have a question about anything involving lobbying, that's who you should call. Is Cynthia, and ask her directly about it. So at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to her.
All right, hello, everybody. I've probably communicated with each of you in cyberspace as well, either by email or phone. And as he said, I've got big shoes to fill. Vicky's been doing this a long time, knows a lot of people, knows how they prefer to do things. So thanks for bearing with me. I'm happy to answer any of your questions anytime. And if I don't know the answer, I will seek it out, which has happened a time or two. So Tom went over some of this. I'm just going to go over it in broad strokes for you, and I've got lists up here, but I'm not going to run down those, okay? So he talked about the definition of a thing of value. So the prohibition is you can't give a thing of value to a public official or a public employee, okay? The real definition of thing of value is found in the exceptions. There's 18 exceptions to the definition of a thing of value, which is a really broad definition, as you saw just a second ago. So where it mostly applies to you, as Tom said, is if you're going to have a widely attended event, an educational function, or an economic development function. Those terms are defined in our Act in the definitions section. It's 3625.1. So in going through this, we have a list of things that we tick off to see whether or not it qualifies as a widely attended event, all right? And that's essentially the definition of them. Are more than 12 people invited that have diversity of views or interest? That doesn't mean that you can't have 12 accountants at the function. It means more than 12 people generally would have a diversity of views. The widely attended event cannot purely be a social event. It has to have some informational component, even if it's just a pamphlet or some sort of poster board or something. It can't be purely social. An educational function is just what you think of it. You go to a conference that's put on by the University of Alabama, that's an educational function. It's a seminar built around an agenda with speakers. And then economic development function, again, that's pretty straightforward, and all of these are defined. So if you are going to do any of those things, the public official and public employee that you're buying whatever you're buying for, whether it's transportation, lodging, meals, those are the things that you want to be buying, or swag. University of Alabama has a bag that they give you with a mug and that sort of thing. Those are things of value, but they're being given in conjunction with a widely attended event or an educational function. One thing I will point out about educational functions is those have to be in the state of Alabama. A widely attended event can be held outside of the state of Alabama. More often than not, an educational function also qualifies as a widely attended event. Okay, so Destin would be very sad if they could no longer have any of our functions for the state of Alabama. But all right, so these are all of the, like I said, I'm not going to go through this whole list. You can talk to us about it anytime. And Tom talked about the meal allowance. So outside of widely attended events, economic development functions, or educational functions, you can also individually buy a public official or a public employee a meal, all right? But that public official or employee is only getting one meal. Your limit is $25 per occurrence. The principal's limit is $50 per occurrence. We have an advisory opinion that says you can't stack those. So how much they get out of it is dependent on them. So if you've got a principal there, they can have a $50 meal, but if both of you are there, they can't have a $75 meal. Does that make sense? Okay. And pre-certifications. In order to get pre-certification is actually a separate exception to the definition of a thing of value. So anything that is pre-certified by the executive director is considered not to be a thing of value. And those are the widely attended event, economic development function, or educational function. Something doesn't have to be pre-certified to not break the law, okay? So you can have those and without getting pre-certified, but public officials really like to know that something's pre-certified. They can go on the website, they can look at the list, they're like, yep, I'm on the list, but it's pre-certified. The Ethics Commission says I'm not going to break the law if I go. I get to go. So it's recommended if you can do it. They have to be to us more than 10 days before the event. That's an administrative rule. We don't have any discretion in that. So you've got to get it to us more than 10 days before. Year to year, if you have the same event every year, you still have to get the pre-certified the next year, okay? It might help if you send us your pre-certification from the last year, but things tend to morph over time. So one event that you say, oh, it's the same thing we did 5 years ago, it might not be exactly the same thing that was happening 5 years ago, okay? So it just has to be done every year. And these are, again, all the questions we're going to ask you about it. And these are all really these are all logical. Like, you know, it needs to have something to do with the public official's position, either ceremonial or they're presenting or something like that. And then you'll need to tell us what you're paying for. And the widely attended events and educational functions, you can pay for spouses also. It's not the case for economic development functions. All right, integral part. So you go to, I'm sure people have been to conferences before, and you go to the conference, and the first night after registration, there is, you know, appetizers and a bar, and people are all hanging out. That would be considered an integral function of the educational function, right? Or an integral part. You're not learning anything, but that is at the beginning of the conference. It's sponsored by the whoever's sponsoring the conference. Everybody's invited, so that's an integral part. If you go off to go do deep sea fishing that has nothing to do with the educational function, that is not an integral part of the educational function, okay? That's purely social. Let's see. And I talked about the 10 days. This is the no stacking of expenditures. We don't have de minimis lobbying. If you're lobbying and being paid to lobby in the state of Alabama, you have to register. It doesn't matter how big or small your bill is, how important it is, you still have to register. And that's not the same as grassroots lobbying, that's separate, but de minimis lobbying, you just have to register. This is the thing I talked about, the standalone event. You can't go on a clay shoot and that be the only thing you're doing, and that doesn't somehow become a widely attended event. This is the dinner that I talked about, and this is the aggregation that Tom was discussing about, you know, if you all put a big whole pot of money in, or money into a big pot, and then you say, oh, I don't know what I'm paying for. We've got to have some information about what you're paying for. Is that money going to the banquet dinner? Is it going to the hotel rooms? You know, what is your principal paying for, or what are you paying for? And that's not something that you would want to do on your own. You would want to check with us before making that decision and the reporting on that, because if you're spending that kind of money, then people out there may be interested in who's paying for what. So that would be something you want to check with us first. All right, there's something called executive branch lobbying. It was an amendment to the definition of lobbying that instead of putting it in the definitions where lobbying is defined, they put it in a separate section at 1.1. But this makes it so that if you are a vendor selling goods and services to the state of Alabama at the state level, that makes you a lobbyist, all right, and you have to register. If you're doing that at the municipal or county level, you do not have to register, because that is a specific exception under the definitions of lobbying, okay? But this one was created and overrides that exception as far as state government goes, all right? If y'all ever have a question about that, you obviously ask us. Okay, so my parting Tom's going to do the parting thoughts, but what I wanted to tell you is I came into this, we found out that that Vicky's replacement was leaving 2 weeks before the end of the year. Obviously, the session started really early this year, and so Vicky had been gone, and Tom said, well, what are we going to do? Go forth. And so I took it over. I've sort of learned on my feet because Vicky's gone, but she's been super helpful and very responsive and answers all my questions. Bless her heart. I feel bad that I have to call her so much. But we've kind of figured it out as we've gone along. But a couple of things that I've recognized that are true now as they were when Vicky was here. When you all register, if you register online and you enter multiple principals, all the principals have to verify your registration before you're actually registered. Okay, so the 3 things we have to have for you to be registered is your lobbyist statement of registration, the principal's verification of that registration, and the $100. okay? And then your name is on the website. Dildred will only give you a badge if you're on the website. She will not give it to you otherwise. And Dildred and I talk every day, or communicate in some way or another. And the principal registration, you can't register independently as a principal. What generates all of this is the lobbyist registering. Okay, so the principal can't just go on and register as a principal unless they have a lobbyist who's already registered to represent them. And so you always got to make sure. You sometimes have to hound your principals. I resend email requests all the time to the principals. If you email me, I can, get involved and help you to try to get them to verify. The quarterly reports, if you have any problems with those, when you go on from year to year, you have to choose which year you are filing for. There's a drop-down menu, and sometimes people miss it, and they're like, it's fourth quarter, I can't get to 2021. Where's 2021? It's only 2022, and I send a screenshot that says, I have a template, actually, that I set up on my emails, because it happens probably 15 times a day. So just choose from that drop-down menu. If you ever have any problems filing, you need something changed. You need your principal's name changed, their address changes, their telephone number, their contact, their email, whatever it is. I can do that actually instantaneously. So if you want to email me that information, that's probably easiest. If you want to call me, that's fine. But mistakes get made more on the telephone when we're talking than it would be in writing. So those are sort of the things that have come up since I've been here. I've got the cell phone number that I sent out to all of you. That I think all of you got the same email address or email that said, hey, if you're going to training, here's the phone number to text questions to. That's my work cell. You can get me on that. You can leave a message. I'll call you back. This is a pretty busy time of year, so I've got, every time I'm on the phone, I get another voicemail from somebody else, but that's great. I'm responsive, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. And I'm, on email pretty much all the time. So that's a great way to get in touch with me too. Does anybody have any questions about the process for your registration? Did your initial registration go okay? Yeah, okay. All right, I think that covered all the things I'm supposed to cover. All right. And thanks everybody out there. And sorry for those that got an email at like 10 last night.
Yeah, on top of the personnel issue, we also had technical issues last night with a VPN. So that was a great thing for Cynthia to have to worry about last night too. I want to circle back and talk about a couple of things. With the pre-certifications, is anybody here new to lobbying? Just starting out? Okay. The pre-certifications are placed on our website. So if you go to our website and you look at the selection for pre-certifications, there's a drop-down that will come up if you click on that. When the drop-down comes up, you'll see a calendar of all events that are scheduled. If you will click on the event, the documents sent to us outlining what will be done at the event and our approval will come up as well. So if you're unsure how to maybe plan an event, or you want to see what other people have done, access that, because it's a pretty good template, especially for somebody who's just starting out. Often you'll see questions that we've asked or comments that we've made about their event, or certainly follow-ups that we've had. But there are a lot of folks who've been doing it for a number of years and have been working with us for a number of years too. And there's some really good models out there about how to structure your request, because the requests track what the code requires for approval. As Cynthia said, we're going to need to know who's being invited to it, and also who sponsors are for the event. That'll become a part of the record too. So we'll need to know that. With events like golfing and fishing and all of that, that can often be hospitality that is an integral part of any event. What Cynthia was really talking about are standalone events. If it's just a golfing trip or if it's just a fishing trip, then that's something that requires a little bit of further scrutiny because it may not be an integral part of a larger event like a widely attended event or an educational function. Now, we will often pre-certify charitable events that might look like one of those two things. It may be a skeet shoot, or it may be a golfing outing or something like that, but it's part of a charitable event that otherwise meets the definition of a widely attended event. So what I would tell you is that if you have an event like that you want to plan, you might want to look at the pre-certification drop-down to see if if there's a good example there. Or the quicker way, if you've never done it before, would be just to tell us what you want to do and let us tell you whether that fits in with an exception, and if it doesn't, how you could restructure the event in a way that would become compliant with the act, because we've done a good bit of that too. We would say, well, the way you've got it structured doesn't, but if you would do this, this, and this, then that would clearly qualify as a widely attended event. So that's part of our role in this too. Some parting thoughts. Remember, and Vicki helped me compile this list a while back, and we've used it for several trainings now. Remember that if your registration changes, you need to update it within 10 days. So if you bring on somebody new, you need to update your listing within 10 days. I will tell you that that is a great benefit to you, because if you're over in the State House and you're lobbying for a particular entity, business entity, or in a subject area that you haven't registered, there are folks out there who will look at your registration and then come over to us and say, this person's over there lobbying and they haven't registered to lobby for this, specific interest or in this area. So, and you might have said, well, I just got them. I haven't updated my registration, but but I'm going to do that. So just make sure you do that as quickly as you can. With all of your filings, we want you to be compliant. So if you have a quarterly filing and you left something off, amend it. Send it to us so that we can get that record online associated with you. The worst thing that you can do is be afraid you're going to get in trouble, so you don't update. We want you to update. If you made a mistake in something, just point that out to us. Our office will work with you to get the correct filing in place. And Vicki certainly did a good job with that, and our office will continue to do that, because we know that it's important to y'all, and we also know that things happen. People make mistakes and things just happen. So all you got to do is just bring it to our attention and then let us help you get it corrected. Make sure that when you file your quarterly filings that you actually review them. We have had inaccurate quarterly filings filed before, and the lobbyist has said, well, somebody in my office did that and I didn't review it. We still want you to amend it and get the right thing in, but it would just be better if you would eyeball it to begin with, and just make sure that what you're filing is accurate. Where that really was a problem was when somebody disclosed expenses of over $250 with a 24-hour period or failed to do that. And don't forget that the pre-certifications are online. So from time to time, people will look and say, okay, Association ABC had this event, it was at this venue, and we know that the rooms are more than $250 a night, and they invited 25 people to it, and they didn't disclose anything on their quarterly filings. So we will likely call you and say, hey, is your quarterly disclosure accurate? And you might say, nope, I'm sorry, I didn't look at that. And then you'd have to file an amended filing. But at that point, there's already kind of something stirred up. That actually happened about 3 years ago. And some press did that and then started wondering why folks weren't disclosing what they had to disclose. There was, in every case, a good explanation for that. And the explanation was that they didn't expend more than $250. But the lobbyist and their principal had to explain that, at least to us, and so that's avoidable if you will just make sure that you have a mind toward what's got to be disclosed and that you're disclosing accurately. Be sure to discuss keeping in good communication with your principal. As Cynthia said, when you are registered, they have to confirm you as a lobbyist. And again, in the session, folks will say, so-and-so's not on your list of registered lobbyists. More often than not, I'd point that out to Vicki, and she would say, oh, they will be next week, because I've worked with this principal enough to know they're always 3 weeks behind. But they're going to come in and they're going to confirm. So it would help out if you also keep in close communication with your principal. The last thing that I'll point out is that on the advisory opinion that Cynthia talked about, the aggregation, that's a pretty big opinion, and it's got a lot of guidance in it for a number of events, like charitable events. How do you assess the value being given to a public official in that setting? But the overarching point of that opinion is that our act requires you to accurately disclose expenditures that you have made that are in excess of $250. So if, when what can be aggregated is aggregated, you're under that amount, then you don't have to disclose it. But, so what we're looking for is what you have actually had to expend, because it is your disclosure. So even though it may sound kind of complicated about the aggregation, the point is that the code requires accurate disclosure. So if you spent more than $250, however we get to that number, then make sure that you accurately disclose that. Okay, and the other thing that it points out is, because questions will come up from time to time, well, what about, we rented out this venue and the rental cost was, X amount, and if we add that on top of it, then what we have spent does exceed $250 in a 24-hour period. And what that opinion explains is that really what we're looking at is what has been consumed by the public official or enjoyed by the public official or public employee. And so there are certain costs, fixed costs, that are not attributable to what's being provided to the public official. I mean, clearly meals would be, clearly items that have some kind of monetary value would be. But fixed costs like the cost of utilities and chair rental is something that opinion addresses, I think, in a pretty fair way. And then also, if you have any questions at all, be sure to call us and ask first, because y'all honestly are the easiest group to answer questions for, because your questions tend to just be geared toward being in compliance with disclosure. And so we can answer those questions for you pretty easily and pretty quickly.
Yeah, they wanted you to cover grassroots lobbying and de minimis.
Okay, a question was asked about grassroots lobbying and de minimis. We do get asked questions from time to time about what is, kind of where do you cross the line in lobbying, and what we have consistently said is when you are making contact with the decision maker, then that's going to qualify as lobbying. So there are folks out there who will want to educate the public about certain matters and encourage them to contact their legislators. And if that's all that's going on, we have traditionally said that that's not lobbying for our purposes. But when it does cross over to actually making contact through whatever method, if it's electronic, if it's in person, if it's on the phone, if it's sending up smoke signals, if that is going directly to the decision maker, then that's going to be considered lobbying. Okay? So, some of your activities, might not qualify as lobbying in what you do. But once you are having contact with the decision maker, then we're going to say that that's lobbying. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, not one you can answer.
Okay.
I think it's an informal opinion.
Okay. And I think somebody's just asked a question that Cynthia is saying is really in the nature of an informal opinion. So be sure to email us that question, and we'll be happy to get you an informal opinion in the way that we are required to do it under the administrative rules. So I predict what you're asking is if you can or can't do something specifically, or if there's certain conduct that you're engaging in that may or may not be in violation of the act. So those are the kind of things we answer all day, every day. So go ahead and get that question to us this afternoon, and we'll answer it for you just as quickly as we can. Yes, ma'am.
Do y'all have any resources or guidelines for lobbyists who work for 501c3?
We don't. We have a number of formal advisory opinions. The question was whether we have guidance for lobbyists who work with nonprofits or other 501c3s. We've got a number of advisory opinions that talk about public officials and their connections with 501c3s. But if you've got a specific question about, I don't really know what you're asking, because if a 501c3 has retained you to be their lobbyist, then they're going to definitionally be a principal, and you're going to be a lobbyist. So the same restrictions are going to apply simply because of the positions you occupy. Most of the questions we get about charitable organizations, though, relate to a public official's membership on a board for the 501c3, fundraising for the 501c3 as a public official, and we're more than happy to address that. I mean, the short answer is that yes, you can do it, but there's some restrictions on how you can do it and who you can solicit. We look at whether the public official is paid, to be on that board, or if it's gratuitous service. And And we've got, again, a couple of formal advisory opinions that talk about that. You know, you have public officials. It's helpful to keep in mind that when we talk about public officials, as we sit in this room, everybody may be thinking about the legislators over at the State House, but the vast majority of everybody who is considered a public official or public employee in Alabama is somebody very different from that. You have somebody at the county level or at the local level generally. So when we talk about public officials serving on boards for nonprofits, think about a member of the city council in Birmingham or Montgomery or Greenville serving on the YWCA board, okay, and fundraising for that in a very small rural place. I mean, the same answer applies regardless, but that's generally come up in that kind of context, not the state level folks who are serving.
Yeah, and Tom, I'll just jump in and say, and that really goes to the direct business associations that you have to report on your quarterly statements. And so that's when the board service sort of comes involved, because then your principal, it has a direct business, it may have a direct business association with a public official or employee that you might not think about. And so just
Right.
just reach out to us and we can help you answer that question.
Yeah, the point of the advisory opinions, though, is that public officials who serve on these boards are performing a valuable function for the public. I mean, they ought to be encouraged to do that, not discouraged from doing that. So the formal opinions really do attempt, at least, to provide a roadmap for how you can do that in a way that doesn't run afoul of the Act, too. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Talk about what should go into your quarterly filings.
I'm going to let Cynthia talk about what should go into your quarterly filings.
Yes, so generally you need to report whether or not you've had any lobbying activities, and the reports have check boxes on them. I'm not in the frame, am I? Okay. The reports have check boxes on them, so if you have lobbying activity, you can have lobbying activity and not have any expenditures. And so there's a check box to say, no, I had no expenditures, but I did lobby. You have to identify the principals have to identify the direct business associations. You have to identify whether or not there's been any financial transactions. I'm not using the language from the statute, but from memory, you've got to report whether or not there's been any loans and things like that. I mean, it's articulated very well in the forms, but there are check boxes that I think could use some reformatting about, because you kind of get lost where you have to say, no, there's no loans, or, no expenditures. But if you have any questions about any of that, you can let me know. That you can file your quarterly reports online, and you can fill them out in paper form and send them to me, and then I would enter the information. One other thing I will tell y'all that is not important to you except for how quickly something shows up online. When I put something, we have a data transfer that happens between the website and our database. And so there's a nightly cycle. If y'all ever hear me talk about a nightly cycle, it's because when I put something in, it may not show up on the other side until the next day. But the quarterly reports is the same thing. So once I put your quarterly report in, it should show up the following day. But I will have had a record of it in my database at the moment that we receive it, and then I put it in. Does that help? Okay. Let me go check my phone, make sure I don't have anything else.
Okay, well, that's all that we intended to cover. Do you have any other questions that we can answer for you before we get out of here? Okay. Consider Cynthia to be a resource. Consider our website to be a resource. If all else fails, just call the main number and yell help, and we'll get you to the right person. Okay. This is an area that you really shouldn't feel a lot of anxiety about, certainly about not knowing what the answer is, because there's too many people who are eager to give you the help that you need to do your job. So thank you for attending. Thank you all for attending online, and just let us know what we can do. All right, thanks.